Professor Namyong Lee's long-form commentary, Why Kim Moon-soo Should Run for Mayor of Seoul for the People Power Party to Succeed in the June 3rd nationwide local elections. The Seoul mayoral election is not a contest of personal likability, but a choice about who will take responsibility for operating the capital of the Republic of Korea. Seoul is not a single city, but the nation's nerve center, where transportation, housing, public safety, disaster response, welfare, industry and education collide simultaneously within an ultra-complex system. The Seoul Metropolitan Government's budget for 2026, rounded, amounts to approximately KRW 52 trillion. This figure is not merely a fiscal plan, but the total weight of authority and accountability. The quality of budget execution directly determines citizens' daily lives and the credibility of the city. At this scale, the mayor of Seoul must not be a loudspeaker, but a precise operator. Elections must serve as tests of operational capability rather than emotional confrontation. Only when this election is framed as a battle over city governance does political judgment regain clarity and legitimacy. Seoul's demographic structure has already rewritten the rules of urban governance. As of the end of 2025, the population aged 65 and older stands at approximately 1.9 million, accounting for about 20% of the city's residents. Seoul has entered a super-aged society in which bottlenecks in care, healthcare, housing and mobility expand simultaneously. At the same time, the tax base and working-age population weaken while household medical and caregiving costs rise structurally. If a mayor responds with abstract slogans, such as expanding welfare, Seoul risks the simultaneous collapse of fiscal sustainability and service quality. What is required is policy engineering capable of operating a city whose demographic foundation has fundamentally changed. The 9th nationwide local elections will be held on June 3, 2026. This election is not simply about selecting a mayor of Seoul. It asks how Seoul will respond when central government policies disrupt citizens' daily lives. As central authorities push forward excessive or reckless initiatives, Seoul must defend its citizens through budgetary and administrative execution. When opposition politics relies only on rhetoric, citizens grow fatigued and politics becomes an object of cynicism. Seoul must move from a war of words to a war of execution. The core of this shift lies in choosing a mayor who can truly operate the system. The stakeholder map of Seoul's governance must first be fixed. Citizens and households are service users, taxpayers, and the ultimate decision makers in elections. District offices deliver frontline services, while the Seoul Metropolitan Government and its affiliated agencies design and coordinate metropolitan services. The Seoul Metropolitan Council sets boundaries through ordinances and budgets and enforces accountability through oversight. The central government and the National Assembly shape Seoul's choices through laws, transfers and regulations, often in conflict with the city's interests. Any candidate who fails to read this network cannot govern Seoul, regardless of eloquence. Beyond these actors, the stakeholder landscape is even more complex. Public corporations such as SH Corporation and Seoul Metro manage the city's housing and transportation arteries, while labor unions influence the continuity of essential services. Construction firms and financial institutions determine the pace and cost of redevelopment and housing supply, and local merchants and the self-employed react immediately to economic and regulatory shocks. Police, fire services, disaster agencies and medical institutions form the final line of defense for safety and emergencies. Education offices and schools influence population movement and residential choice. Media and digital platforms compress incidents into frames that shape public opinion, while civic organizations monitor and set agendas affecting administrative legitimacy. The mayor must coordinate these interests, reduce friction, and guarantee continuity of essential services. To manage this network systematically, Seoul's administration must be designed using the Federal Enterprise Architecture (FEA) framework. Urban governance must be decomposed into services, functions, data, and outcomes, with clear linkages among responsibility holders, performance indicators, and risk factors. Transportation is not merely movement, but a composite service intertwined with safety, environment, and economic activity. Housing simultaneously drives welfare, assets, finance, and demographics. Public safety and disaster management concern prevention, training, and resource allocation as much as incident response. Welfare is not cash distribution, but the integration of care, housing, and healthcare. Industry and jobs result from the interaction of regulation, infrastructure, talent, and data, while education reflects demographic and housing policy outcomes. Without presenting this structure as a coherent blueprint, governance degenerates into slogans and rising costs. Global standards and world best practices provide clear guidance. Fiscal transparency and performance management are universally adopted through outcome-based budgeting systems. Risk-based management has become the norm in public decision-making. Business continuity and disaster preparedness require planning, training, and reserve capacity to prevent service disruption. Anti-corruption and conflict of interest controls must embed prevention, detection, and enforcement across procurement, subsidies, and outsourced services. Digital governance demands a balance between data-driven administration, privacy protection, and cybersecurity. These principles are not optional. They define the baseline of a credible modern city. Korea's legal framework already mandates these responsibilities. The Local Autonomy Act and the Local Finance Act impose accountability for administrative management and budget execution, while enforcing fiscal soundness and transparency. Disaster and safety laws require comprehensive cycles of prevention, preparedness, response, and recovery. Public ethics and conflict of interest regulations structurally block private gain within public office. Ultimately, a mayoral candidate must demonstrate the ability to fulfill these legally required responsibilities in practice. Power without operational capability becomes the most expensive form of disaster. Under these conditions, Kim Moon-soo, former governor of Gyeonggi Province, is the most appropriate candidate for mayor of Seoul. Seoul is a city where vast budgets and complex interests collide, demanding evaluation based on operational experience rather than personality or rhetoric. Kim Moon-soo has governed at the metropolitan scale and managed the interface between the state and the capital region. Administration is not accomplished through resolve alone. It requires the skill to bind organizations, budgets, laws, and field operations together. A KRW 52 trillion budget leaves no margin for symbolic politics. What Seoul needs is a leader capable of executing that budget precisely for public safety, economic recovery, and protection of the vulnerable. When Kim Moon-soo runs as the mayoral candidate of Seoul, the entire landscape of the nationwide local elections shifts. Seoul is not just another region. It functions as the political signal tower of the nation. The mayoral candidate becomes the banner that determines the morale and coherence of candidates across provinces, cities, districts, and councils. When Seoul wavers, the country wavers. When Seoul stands firm, the country gains clarity. A credible and stable mayoral candidacy enables candidates nationwide to campaign with confidence. In elections, collapse rarely begins at the grassroots. It begins when the flagship falters. Kim Moon-soo's candidacy provides not symbolism but practical force, aligning organization, resources, and narrative across the entire election map. Kim Moon-soo's foremost strength lies in metropolitan national integrated governance experience. Seoul is not governed as a collection of districts, but as a metropolitan system that must negotiate and sometimes confront the central government. Transportation, disaster management, welfare, and industrial policy operate simultaneously, and failure in one triggers cascading effects. Kim Moon-soo's tenure as governor involved designing the capital region as a single living and economic zone. Seoul's transportation, housing, and industry are inseparable from Gyeonggi and Incheon. Governance experience at this scale converts immediately into operational readiness for Seoul. A second strength is crisis management and execution-oriented leadership. Seoul faces daily flashpoints, traffic congestion, safety incidents, labor disputes, housing volatility, commercial decline, and gaps in healthcare and care services. In such moments, a mayor must not explain but resolve. Resolution requires fixing responsibility, timelines, budgets, and command structures. Kim Moon-soo's field-centered administrative approach treats crises not as isolated events but as structural failures to be corrected and prevented. In a city of Seoul's scale, prevention, not reaction, determines success. A third strength is policy engineering suited to a super-aged Seoul. With 1.9 million residents aged 65 or older, fragmented approaches to care, healthcare, housing, and mobility lead to fiscal leakage and service collapse. Advanced cities integrate community care with healthcare, housing, and transportation, using data to proactively identify vulnerable populations. Seoul must do the same through integrated contracting, staffing, and budget structures. Such integration requires metropolitan-level coordination experience, not rhetoric. When Kim Moon-soo enters the race, the election shifts from a contest of ideological slogans to a coalition capable of uniting not only free conservatives, but also the political center. Seoul voters prioritize stability and execution over ideology. Kim Moon-soo's administrative track record signals operational reliability to centrist voters. Anti-Lee Jae-myung forces do not coalesce through repeated slogans, but through a candidate who demonstrates the ability to counter central government overreach with budgetary and administrative execution. Kim Moon-soo's candidacy provides that signal. How Seoul spends its KRW 52 trillion budget determines its future. Budgets must function as investments that reduce risk and increase productivity. Transportation must restore economic time through punctuality. Housing must stabilize household anxiety through supply and order. Safety must lower accident probability and social costs. Care and healthcare must protect not only the vulnerable, but also the middle class from collapse. Industry and education must absorb demographic shocks over the long term. These elements must be designed as a single integrated system. Protecting Seoul is not merely managing a city, it is safeguarding the center of the Republic of Korea. When Seoul's administration falters, national credibility falters. When Seoul's finances weaken, national finances follow. The June 3, 2026 election is both a choice for Seoul citizens and a decision about the nation's governance trajectory. Honest citizens must judge not by emotion or agitation, but by numbers, systems, and execution capability. The mayor of Seoul should be chosen not by who speaks most forcefully, but by who executes most precisely and prevents most effectively. By that standard, Kim Moon-soo is the most appropriate choice. Thank you for watching Professor Namyong Lee's long-form commentary.